In the lawless Wyoming Territory of 1875, justice bent to the will of powerful white cattle barons who wanted Elijah Freeman's land. The former Buffalo soldier stood alone in chains before a corrupt court, falsely accused of murder and cattle rustling, until the territory's most feared widow shocked the courtroom by claiming him as her husband. Now trapped in a desperate charade with the notorious cattle baroness Victoria Hargrove, Elijah must uncover who framed him, while navigating a dangerous pretense that blurs into forbidden truth with each passing day. The courthouse air hung thick with sweat and tobacco. Dust motes swirled in sunlight through tall windows, catching on polished oak and tarnished brass. Wyoming Territory, 1875, where justice bent to the will of wealth. Elijah Freeman stood alone at the defendant's table. Chains bit into his wrists. The former Buffalo soldier kept his spine military straight, eyes forward, face impassive. The crowd behind him murmured like a waiting storm. Judge Caldwell squinted over half-moon spectacles, his jowls quivering with anticipation. The jury foreman passed a folded paper to the bailiff, who delivered it with the ceremony of an executioner. The judge savored the moment, unfolding the paper with theatrical slowness. On the charges of cattle rustling, destruction of property, and the murder of Thomas Whitfield, we find the defendant, Elijah Freeman. The courthouse doors crashed open. Every head turned. Conversation died. In the silence, boot heels struck the wooden floor with deliberate rhythm. Victoria Hargrove stood framed in the doorway, dressed in black, her face half hidden by a lace veil. Light caught the silver buttons of her riding jacket. Her presence filled the room like smoke. The crowd parted for her. No one spoke. No one touched her. Victoria Hargrove owned more cattle than any man in the territory. Widowed 3 years prior, she'd doubled her holdings while men predicted her ruin. She walked to the front, removed her veil. Her face was all angles and winter, eyes the color of gunmetal. "Your Honor," she said, her voice carried without effort, "this trial is a mockery. This man cannot be guilty of murdering Thomas Whitfield on the night in question." The judge's face flushed red. "Mrs. Hargrove, you will not interrupt these proceedings." "Because he was with me." She turned, facing the gallery directly. "Elijah Freeman is my husband." The courtroom erupted. Judge Caldwell's gavel cracked like rifle fire. William Preston, the territory's second wealthiest rancher, stood from his front row seat, face purple with rage. Elijah stared at Victoria Hargrove. He'd never exchanged more than 5 words with the woman. Now she claimed to be his wife. "Order!" the judge bellowed. "I will have order!" Victoria smiled. The smile never reached her eyes. The stone mansion rose from the prairie like something forgotten by time. Victoria's carriage led the way. The prison wagon carrying Elijah followed, flanked by armed deputies. Judge Caldwell had granted a 3-day stay of proceedings. The marriage claim created legal complications requiring investigation. Victoria waited on the front steps. Wind tugged at her skirts. She watched impassively as deputies unlocked Elijah's chains. "My husband will not be restrained in his own home," she said. The lead deputy spat in the dirt. 3 days, Mrs. Hargrove. Judge wants proof of marriage by then, or he goes back to jail." She nodded once. The deputies departed in a cloud of dust and muttered curses. Elijah stood at the bottom of the steps, rubbing his wrists. The Baroness stared down at him. "Follow me," she said. The study smelled of leather and wood smoke. Maps covered one wall, territory surveys, property lines, cattle trails. Victoria poured 2 glasses of amber liquid, offered one to Elijah. He didn't take it. "Why?" "Because you'll need it." "Why did you claim me as your husband?" Victoria set his glass down, sipped from her own. "Because you're innocent, and I need your help." "You need my help." Disbelief edged his voice. "Someone is systematically destroying small ranchers, stealing cattle, burning property, killing when necessary. Thomas Whitfield discovered something. Now he's dead. You're blamed." "And you know this how?" She ignored the question. "The same men framing you want my land. They've tried buying. Now they're trying intimidation." So you've developed a conscience. I've developed practical concerns. Victoria moved to the map wall. Accept my offer. Pretend to be my husband for 6 months. I'll prove your innocence. You'll help me identify who's really stealing cattle and threatening my holdings. And if I refuse, then you hang tomorrow. Elijah finally took the drink. Why would anyone believe we married? People believe what frightens and fascinates them. A widow with too much power. A black man with too much ambition. Our marriage is their nightmare. They'll believe it because they fear it. Night found Elijah in new quarters, a bedroom connected to Victoria's by a hidden passage behind a bookcase. The passage wasn't for romantic assignations. It was for maintaining appearances while keeping distance. Victoria's rules were clear. Separate lives behind closed doors. In public, a united front. No questions about her past. No deviation from her plan. Morning brought the first test. Silas Morgan, the territorial bank president, arrived unannounced. Victoria received him in the parlor, Elijah at her side. Morgan's eyes flicked between them. Quite the surprise, Victoria. The territory is buzzing. I imagine so. Victoria's smile was polite frost. When did this blessed union occur? 3 months ago, a private ceremony in Denver. Morgan nodded, unconvinced. Strange that you kept it secret. Is it? Victoria placed her hand on Elijah's arm. Given the territory's sentiments? Morgan conceded with a tilt of his head. William Preston is quite disturbed by this development. Mr. Preston's disturbances are not my concern. After Morgan departed, Elijah confronted Victoria in her study. You and Morgan exchanged looks. You know each other better than you pretend. Victoria straightened papers on her desk. Everyone has history in this territory. You have maps of my property, detailed notes. I have maps of every property. Not with notes about the owner's military service or childhood. Victoria didn't flinch. Information is survival. Dinner brought more unwelcome guests. William Preston arrived with 3 other ranchers. They came without wives, a deliberate insult. Victoria was ready. The table gleamed with silver and crystal. She wore emeralds at her throat. Preston dominated the conversation, peppering them with questions about their courtship. Victoria fielded each one with practiced ease. And where exactly did you meet Mrs. Hargrove, Freeman? Preston finally addressed Elijah directly. Denver livestock auction. Elijah kept his voice neutral. She outbid me. And that led to marriage? Preston's skepticism was pointed as a knife. It led to conversation, Victoria interjected. My late husband valued Mr. Freeman's insights during the war. He served with distinction with the Buffalo Soldiers. Elijah concealed his surprise. They'd never discussed cover stories. Victoria knew details about his service that weren't common knowledge. Later, alone in his room, Elijah found a letter slipped under his door. Inside, a deed to 40 acres of prime grazing land, signed over to him. And a note in Victoria's precise handwriting. A wedding gift between strangers. Tomorrow we begin finding who really killed Thomas Whitfield. Darkness claimed the prairie. Victoria and Elijah rode side by side, keeping to the shadows. Stars pierced the sky like buckshot through black cloth. The night held its breath. They'd been tracking cattle movements for 2 weeks. Elijah wore his Buffalo Soldier vigilance like armor. Victoria rode with the confidence of a woman who owned the earth beneath her horse's hooves. There, Elijah whispered, pointing to distant lantern light moving across Preston's north pasture. Victoria produced field glasses from her saddlebag. 3 men, moving cattle without brands. They're herding them toward the old mining road. They followed at a distance. The rustlers drove the cattle into a secluded canyon. 2 more men waited with branding irons and a small fire. Preston's men, Victoria murmured, stealing from the smaller ranches, rebranding. Elijah nodded, building his herd while destroying competition. The ride back was silent. Different knowledge hung between them now. Shared purpose formed a fragile bridge across distrust. Morning brought a threatening note delivered by a ranch hand. Victoria read it by the breakfast table window. Her face betrayed nothing, but her fingers tightened on the paper. "We know the truth about your marriage." She folded it precisely, tucked it into her pocket. Elijah watched from across the room. He didn't ask. She didn't offer. Later in the stables, Victoria found Elijah mending tack. "You need to understand the territory's politics," she said without preamble. "Preston controls the bank through Morgan. Morgan controls the judge. The judge delivers verdicts." "And where do you fit in this arrangement?" "I don't. That's the problem." Sunlight caught dust rising from the hay. Elijah's hands worked leather with practiced precision. "My sergeant taught me to track Comanche across bare rock. I can teach you to read sign." Victoria's eyebrow lifted slightly. "You would share that knowledge?" "Knowledge is survival," he said, echoing her words. Hayes, Victoria's foreman, watched them from the doorway. His weathered face creased with disapproval. Victoria nodded to him, a silent dismissal. He didn't move. "Mrs. Hargrove," Hayes said, voice pitched low. "Riders coming. Preston and the sheriff." The sheriff's visit was brief, pointed. He delivered papers requiring proof of marriage within the week. Victoria received them with cool composure. That evening, Elijah found Victoria in her study, staring at her late husband's portrait above the fireplace. "Charles purchased this land when nobody wanted it," she said without turning. "Built it while everyone predicted failure. Died before seeing it thrive." "Illness?" Elijah asked. "That's what the doctor recorded." The portrait showed a stern-faced man with calculating eyes. Nothing like Elijah. Everything like the territory itself, unforgiving, ambitious, cold. "Your Buffalo Soldier pension," Victoria said, changing the subject. "You saved every dollar to buy your land." Elijah stiffened. "How do you know that?" "I make it my business to know everything about this territory." "And your husband?" "What did he do during the war?" Victoria's fingers traced the edge of her desk. "Profited from it." The admission hung between them, honest and ugly. Days passed. The pretense became routine. They rode together, took meals together, maintained careful distance otherwise. Hayes remained watchful, suspicious. The ranch hands whispered. Town gossip flourished. A ranch hand was thrown from his horse while mending fence in the north pasture. Elijah found him, leg shattered, bleeding badly. He carried the man 2 miles to the house. Victoria watched as Elijah cleaned the wound, set the bone with brutal efficiency. His hands, so capable of violence, moved with healer's grace. "Field medicine," he explained, catching her gaze. "Learned after Beecher's Island. Too many men, too few doctors." The man would keep his leg. Victoria touched Elijah's shoulder briefly before leaving the room. A gesture small as a sparrow, significant as a storm. On Saturday, they attended a town gathering. Social necessity, Victoria explained. Appearances mattered. Women clustered around Victoria with forced smiles and prying questions. Men stared at Elijah with undisguised contempt. "Surprising choice of husband, Mrs. Hargrove," one woman said, voice sweet as poisoned honey. "Though I suppose good help is hard to find these days." Victoria's smile remained fixed. "My husband killed 6 men in the service of this country. Saved countless others. What has your husband done besides drink away your inheritance, Mrs. Branson?" The woman paled. Across the room, a rancher's son barred Elijah's path to the refreshment table. "My father says no self-respecting white woman would lower herself to your kind unless coerced." Before Elijah could respond, Victoria appeared at his side. Her voice carried. "Fortunately, your father's respect means nothing to me. His debts to my bank, however, mean a great deal." The young man retreated. Victoria's hand found Elijah's arm. Her grip was iron wrapped in silk. That night, they shared brandy by the study fire. For the first time, Victoria asked about Elijah's family. His mother, born in captivity. His father, a free blacksmith who purchased his wife's freedom, Elijah's childhood in Ohio, his decision to join the Buffalo Soldiers. In turn, he asked about her life before Charles Hargrove, the daughter of a failed merchant, marriage at 17 to a man 30 years her senior, the long journey west. "We are both survivors," she said, eyes reflecting firelight. Their glasses touched. Something shifted between them, subtle as weather changing. Hayes found them later, walking back from the stables. They weren't touching, weren't speaking, just walking side by side in companionable silence. His face darkened. "Mrs. Hargrove, that fence line needs discussing." Victoria nodded. "Tomorrow, Hayes." "Now, ma'am, it's urgent." Elijah continued to the house. Through an open window, he caught fragments of their conversation. "The men are talking," Hayes said. "This isn't what we agreed to." "What I agree to is my business," Victoria responded. "You're forgetting why we started this." Elijah moved away from the window. The half-heard conversation coiled around his thoughts like smoke. That night, storm clouds gathered over the prairie. Victoria rode out alone to check the herd. Elijah watched her go, silhouette dissolving into darkness. The storm broke with sudden violence. Wind screamed across the plains. Rain fell in sheets. Midnight passed, no sign of Victoria. Elijah saddled a horse. Hayes appeared in the stable doorway. "Where do you think you're going?" "To find her." "You don't know these lands." "I know storms," Elijah mounted, "and I know she's out in one." Hayes stood aside, face unreadable in the lantern light. Elijah found her sheltering in an abandoned line shack, horse tethered outside. Victoria was soaked through, shivering violently. He built a fire, wrapped her in his coat. Her skin burned with fever, eyes glazed with delirium. "Charles," she murmured. "Charles, I had to—" Her fingers gripped Elijah's wrist. Her words became incoherent. Elijah held her hand as the storm raged beyond the thin walls. 3 days the fever held her. 3 days Elijah remained at her bedside. Hayes brought supplies but asked no questions. On the 4th morning, Victoria's fever broke. She opened her eyes, found Elijah sleeping in a chair beside her bed, his hand still holding hers. Something fragile passed across her face. Vulnerability quickly masked. Later that week, Victoria rode to the small fenced plot where Charles Hargrove lay buried. Elijah followed at a distance, watching as she knelt beside the grave. Her shoulders shook, one hand pressed against the earth. Elijah approached slowly, knelt beside her, said nothing. Victoria's hand found his. When she looked up, her face was wet with the first tears he'd ever seen her shed. "I never wanted this land," she whispered. "Never wanted any of it." Elijah reached out, brushed a tear from her cheek. The gesture crossed a boundary, changed everything. She leaned forward. He met her halfway. Their kiss tasted of grief and possibility, promise and danger. The wind changed direction across the prairie. Something changed after the kiss. Victoria and Elijah moved differently around each other. Their glances held longer. Their silences grew comfortable. Their pretense gained substance. The breakfast table became neutral territory. They lingered over coffee, comparing notes, planning strategy. "I've been investigating you for months," Victoria said one morning, voice matter of fact. Her confession arrived between toast and marmalade. Elijah set his cup down. "Why?" "I believed you might be working with the rustlers. Your herd grew too quickly for a man with your resources." "And now?" "Now I know better." Victoria unfolded a map across the table. She marked locations where they'd spotted rustling operations. A pattern emerged. All activity centered around land owned by small ranchers who'd refused to sell to Preston. "He creates the problem, then offers the solution." Victoria's finger traced the map. Cattle disappear. Finances strain. He offers to buy at half value. And Morgan provides loans with impossible terms. "Precisely." Elijah studied her face, the sharp angles, the careful composure. "Why tell me this now?" "Because I trust you. The words seemed to surprise her as much as him. Trust, a currency rarer than gold in the territory. The judge sent more papers, demanded sworn statements from wedding witnesses. Victoria forged testimonials, created a paper trail, built their fiction into something that could withstand scrutiny. Nights grew shorter. Spring softened the land. Snow melted from the distant mountains. The creek behind the house ran full and fast. Victoria and Elijah rode together daily now, not just for surveillance, sometimes just to ride. Her gelding and his mare moved in easy rhythm across the awakening prairie. "What happens when this ends?" Elijah asked one afternoon as they rested beneath a cottonwood. "When we prove Preston framed me?" Victoria watched a hawk circle overhead. "You go back to your land. I stay here. The territory remembers nothing." "That simple?" "Nothing is simple here." The hawk dove, struck something in the tall grass, rose again with prey in its talons. Victoria was wrong about the territory forgetting. Some things, once seen, could never be unseen. Their marriage might be fiction. What grew between them was not. They found evidence in Preston's ledgers. A ranch hand with loose lips and gambling debts sold them information. Morgan's bank was funding the purchase of stolen cattle. Judge Caldwell received kickbacks for legal support. They compiled documentation, built their case carefully, needed more time before taking it to the territorial governor. Hayes watched their growing closeness with increasing agitation. His loyalty to Victoria had always seemed absolute. Now it wavered. He confronted Elijah in the stables. "You're getting too comfortable, Freeman. I'm doing what she asked, finding who framed me. And warming her bed?" Elijah's hand tightened on the bridle he was cleaning. "You forget yourself." "Number, she's the one forgetting." Hayes spat into the straw. "Forgetting why you're really here." That night, Preston's men burned fence lines on Victoria's north property. A warning. Elijah and the ranch hands rode out to fight the fire, returned at dawn, clothes smelling of smoke, faces streaked with soot. Victoria waited on the porch, said nothing, her relief evident only in the slight easing of her shoulders. She handed Elijah a telegram from the judge. The court demanded their presence in 3 days, a ruling on the marriage validity. Their time was running out. Morning brought no reprieve. Hayes was missing, his bunk untouched, his horse gone from the stable. Victoria's face hardened. "He's gone to Preston." By afternoon, their fears were confirmed. Hayes returned with the sheriff and 2 deputies, carried a warrant for Elijah's arrest, violation of release terms, marriage fraud. The sheriff approached the porch where Victoria and Elijah stood side by side. "Got some questions about this marriage arrangement," the sheriff said, hand resting on his pistol. Hayes hung back, wouldn't meet Victoria's eyes. "My marriage is not subject to interrogation, Sheriff," Victoria replied. "Judge says different. Freeman comes with us until this is sorted." Elijah tensed. 3 months ago he would have been taken without question. Now Victoria's hand found his arm. A small restraint. A silent communication. "Inside," she murmured. "All of you. We'll discuss this civilly." The sheriff hesitated, then nodded, followed them into the study. Hayes trailed behind, uneasy as a guilty dog. Victoria poured whiskey, offered none to Hayes. "What proof would satisfy the judge?" she asked. The sheriff shifted his weight. "Way I hear it, nothing will. Preston's got his mind set." "Preston doesn't control the territory." "Says the woman who married colored to keep her land." Hayes broke in, voice bitter. "This isn't what we planned, Victoria." The room went still. Elijah looked between them. "What exactly did you plan, Hayes?" he asked softly. Hayes glanced at Victoria, found no help there, only cold fury. "She needed a husband for appearances," Hayes said finally, "to keep control of the ranch, protect it from Preston. I suggested you because you were already in jail. Easy to control." The betrayal settled over Elijah like winter frost. He turned to Victoria, found her face unreadable. "And the murder charge?" he asked. "Was that part of the plan too?" "No." Victoria's voice was steel. The murder charge was Preston's idea. Hayes just saw opportunity. Hayes moved suddenly, drew his pistol. Enough talk. Freeman comes with us now. The sheriff looked surprised. Hayes, put that away. This ain't the plan. Plans change. Hayes's gun hand trembled. Victoria, tell him the truth. About Charles. About what really happened. Victoria went very still. Hayes. Tell him how your husband didn't die of any fever. Tell him how you shot Charles Hargrove in his study when he tried to sell this ranch to Preston's consortium. The confession hung in the air like gun smoke. The sheriff's hand moved to his own weapon. That true, Mrs. Hargrove? Victoria's gaze never left Hayes. Charles signed papers to sell everything we built, without my knowledge, without my consent. When I confronted him, he struck me, said a woman had no right to question his decisions. Her voice remained steady, her hands perfectly still. I defended myself. Hayes helped me cover it, made it look like Charles died of heart failure. Hayes nodded. And now she's forgotten why we did it. Thinks she can defy Preston. Thinks she can keep this land with a colored man at her side. Elijah watched Victoria's face, searched for remorse, found only resolute certainty. The sheriff whistled low. That changes matters considerably. Victoria turned to him. Indeed it does. How much is Preston paying you to look the other way on cattle rustling, Sheriff? The question landed like a slap. The sheriff's face reddened. I ought to arrest you right now for murder. You could. But then who would reveal your arrangements with Judge Caldwell to the territorial governor? A tense silence stretched between them. The standoff ended with an unexpected arrival. Silas Morgan appeared at the study door, impeccably dressed, expression calculating. Sheriff. Deputies. He nodded to each. I hope I'm not interrupting. Hayes kept his gun trained on Elijah. This doesn't concern the bank, Morgan. Everything in this territory concerns the bank. Morgan entered, assessed the scene with practiced ease. Victoria, Mr. Freeman, I bring a proposition from William Preston. Victoria's laugh held no humor. How timely! Mr. Preston is prepared to forget certain questions about your husband's death. In exchange, you'll sign over your water rights and the north section of your property. And if I refuse? Morgan smiled thinly. Then Mr. Freeman returns to jail, and you face murder charges. Victoria crossed to her desk, opened a drawer, removed a bound ledger. Interesting proposition. She laid the book on her desk. I have one of my own. Tell Preston if anything happens to me or Mr. Freeman, these records go to the governor. Every transaction, every bribe, every theft. Morgan's smile faltered. You're bluffing. I never bluff with land or lives, Silas. The room balanced on knife's edge. Hayes's gun still pointed at Elijah. The sheriff caught between duty and self-preservation. Morgan calculating odds. The moment shattered when a ranch hand burst through the door. Riders coming, Mrs. Hargrove. Looks like Preston himself with 6 men. The distraction was enough. Elijah moved with battlefield swiftness, disarmed Hayes with one precise strike, took the pistol, leveled it at the sheriff. Victoria hadn't moved from behind her desk. Gentlemen, it seems our discussion will need to include additional parties. Through the window, dust rose from approaching horses, Preston's men coming to claim what was never theirs. Victoria met Elijah's eyes across the room. A world of understanding passed between them in a single glance. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Preston's arrival brought no resolution, only stalemate. Men with guns facing men with secrets, a fragile balance of threats and counter-threats. Nobody won, nobody died. An uneasy truce held until sundown. Victoria made her decision that night. The thoroughbreds would go first, her prized breeding stock, the horses more valuable than most men's entire holdings. Elijah found her in the stables at dawn, watching her ranch hands prepare the animals for transport. Denver? He asked. She nodded. $5,000 for the lot, enough to hire Simmons. James Simmons, the legendary lawyer who defended governors and hanged senators, a man who collected enemies like some collected coins. And if it's not enough? Victoria watched her prize stallion being loaded. The animal's coat gleamed copper in the early light. Then we fight with what we have. 2 days later, Elijah was back in chains. Not in a cell this time. The courthouse again. Different charges. Same purpose. Judge Caldwell presided with poorly concealed satisfaction. The gallery filled with Preston's allies. The air hummed with anticipation. Victoria sat alone in the front row, back straight, face composed, no sign of the fortune she'd sacrificed. The courtroom doors opened. A tall man entered, silver-haired, expensive suit. Every eye followed him. James Simmons had arrived. The proceedings shifted like weather. Simmons presented documentation showing Thomas Whitfield alive days after his supposed murder, produced witnesses placing Preston's men at the actual crime scene. The case against Elijah unraveled thread by thread. Victoria watched impassively. Only Elijah noticed her hands, tightly clasped in her lap, knuckles white as bone. On the third day, Simmons called Victoria to testify. Her walk to the witness stand carried the weight of inevitability. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth. Met Elijah's eyes briefly before facing the court. "Mrs. Hargrove," Simmons began, "would you describe your relationship with the defendant?" "Elijah Freeman is not my husband," Victoria said. The words fell like stones into still water. "Our marriage was a deception, a necessary one." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Why perpetrate such a deception? To save an innocent man, and to gain time to prove who really murdered Thomas Whitfield. And who did murder Thomas Whitfield? William Preston ordered it done, because Whitfield discovered Preston's men stealing cattle and rebranding them. Preston stood from his seat. "This is slander." The judge banged his gavel. Preston remained standing, face flushed with rage. Victoria continued, voice steady. 3 years ago, my husband Charles Hargrove attempted to sell our ranch to Preston's consortium without my knowledge or consent. When I discovered the betrayal, I confronted him. The courtroom went silent. Even Preston sat down. "Charles struck me, said a woman had no right to question his business decisions. He came at me again. I took his pistol from the desk drawer, warned him to stay back. He didn't." Victoria's face remained composed. Her voice never wavered. "I shot him once. He died instantly. My foreman Hayes helped me conceal what happened. Made it appear Charles died of heart failure." Judge Caldwell leaned forward. "Are you confessing to murder, Mrs. Hargrove?" "I'm confessing to self-defense, and to protecting what was rightfully mine." The courtroom erupted. Women whispered behind gloved hands. Men shifted uncomfortably. One voice rose above the others. Martha Wilkins, the seamstress. She stood among the spectators. "I saw Charles Hargrove's bruises on her arms," she called out. "Year after year, we all did. We said nothing." Another woman stood, Rebecca Turner, the baker's wife. "My sister worked in that house. She cleaned blood from the rug more than once." A third woman rose, then a fourth. Women Victoria had barely spoken to, women who had watched her with judgment and envy. Now they stood, bearing witness. Judge Caldwell banged his gavel furiously. The bailiffs moved through the crowd, restoring order. When calm returned, Simmons produced his final evidence. Bank records showing Judge Caldwell had received payments from Preston's mining company. Documents proving Preston and Morgan had systematically conspired to drive small ranchers out of business. The judge ordered the courtroom cleared. The proceedings would continue privately. Outside, Victoria stood alone on the courthouse steps. Women who had never spoken to her approached, touched her arm, nodded in silent solidarity. The trial stretched another week. Elijah's charges were dismissed. Preston and Morgan faced indictments. Judge Caldwell resigned in disgrace. Victoria's case proved more complex. Self-defense seemed plausible. Concealing a death remained criminal. Elijah contacted his former commanding officer. The man had connections to the territorial governor, owed Elijah for actions never recorded in official reports. The governor's decision arrived by telegram. Victoria would receive a conditional pardon, no prison time, but the north section of her ranch would be forfeited to the territory as penalty, half her empire for her freedom. Preston got part of what he wanted after all. 6 months passed. Spring came again to the territory. New grass covered old scars on the land. The small church near Victoria's ranch had never hosted such a gathering. Ranchers and townspeople, former soldiers and shopkeepers, women who had stood for Victoria in the courthouse, men who had once crossed the street to avoid Elijah. The bride wore blue, not white. No veil covered her face. The groom wore a new suit and his Buffalo Soldier medals. This time the marriage was real. The papers legitimate. The witnesses genuine. Victoria Hargrove became Victoria Freeman. Their lands joined legally as their lives had already joined in fact. The reception spilled onto the church grounds. Food and music. Children playing between the gravestones. Life asserting itself among monuments to what had passed. Silas Morgan approached Victoria as she stood watching the celebration. He carried a small wooden box. "A wedding gift," he said, offering it tentatively, "and perhaps an apology." Victoria accepted the box, but didn't open it. Unexpected, Silas. Change comes to us all. He glanced toward where Preston had once stood among the territory's elite. Some by choice, some by force. "And which are you?" Morgan smiled thinly. "A banker adapts to the economic climate. Always." He moved away, stopping briefly to speak with the newly appointed territorial judge. Elijah joined Victoria, took her hand. What did Morgan want? To secure his place in the new order. She tucked the unopened box into her pocket. We should watch him carefully. Their ranch became something new in the territory. Victoria and Elijah hired both white and black cowboys, paid fair wages, built a bunkhouse where men ate at the same table regardless of color. Some neighbors cut ties, others cautiously adapted. The territory's memory was selective, but not entirely forgetful. The ranch prospered. Victoria's remaining thoroughbreds produced foals with exceptional bloodlines. Elijah's cattle breeding methods proved effective. Together, they built something neither could have built alone. On their wedding night, Victoria had taken Elijah to the root cellar beneath the main house, showed him what no one else had seen, a hidden room, walls lined with documents, evidence against every powerful man in the territory. Insurance, she had said simply. Knowledge remained survival. One evening months later, they stood together on the porch. The setting sun painted the land in shades of amber and gold. Dust rose from the road leading to the ranch. Riders approaching. "Governor's men," Elijah said, recognizing the territorial flag. "Coming about the water rights case, most likely." Victoria watched the approaching dust cloud without expression. Or coming about Morgan's new railroad proposal, the one that conveniently requires our remaining land. "They never stop coming, do they?" "Never." Her smile was cold but genuine. "Let them come." Her hand slipped into his. With her other hand, she reached for the rifle that always stood beside the door. "I didn't survive this long by telling just one lie." The sun sank lower. Their shadows stretched long across the porch boards, two figures becoming one in the fading light. Darkness gathered at the edges of the land they had fought for. Together they faced what came with the night.